Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A section. We are here staring down the barrel of martial law, ready to answer your super chat questions. So without further ado, shall we get to it?
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay. Our friend Holly Math Nerd asks, my dear friend in Michigan, which is a swing state, is a classical liberal and has a dilemma. She rightly sees Trump as a psycho and DNC as corrupt. With neither candidate fit for office, who does game theory suggest she vote for?
It's a very good question.
Yep.
But I think the answer is obvious, frankly.
Wow.
Yep. It's Yang McRaven, or McRaven Yang. I don't know which one it's going to be, but it's definitely that ticket because you know what? There's one thing we have to do. We have to defeat Trump Biden. In 2020, we have to defeat Trump Biden. There's no question about it. We should have defeated Trump Clinton in 2016. This time we have to defeat Trump Biden.
So what does an individual do?
Well, honestly, I think it is up to those of us who have a certain amount of reach in the world to derail this runaway train before it reaches the station that it's going to go barreling through, or whatever the proper way to end that analogy is.
How will derail not simply leave one of the two presumptive next presidents in power?
No, I'm dead serious. I think the announcement by our two major parties that they are not serious about leading in an era where we face things as scary as SARS-CoV-2 and the breakdown of law and order over... There's just no question. This has to end. We cannot play the duopolies game anymore. It has to end. And I guess my point would be, look, the only reason we didn't end it before, everybody knows it's broken. The only reason we didn't end it before is because it would be impossible to end it. But impossible things are now happening every day. So this is the era of the impossible. It is time that we challenge this dynamic because we ain't going to survive if we let it run its course.
All right. I'll let the dog finish up your thought for you. And Zach, I wonder if you can get her to be quiet. Thank you, sweetie. Okay. Heather and Bret, thank you. The major media appears to be ignoring Antifa. This is so underreported that convincing people of its veracity is almost impossible. Advice? Also, is Benjamin Boyce a trustworthy journalist? That second thing seems a little bit of a non sequitur, although he's obviously spoken somewhat to Antifa.
Yeah. Benjamin Boyce is a top-notch guy and a trustworthy human being. I don't know that he'd call himself a journalist. I don't know what journalist means in this era, given what has happened to journalists. But I certainly trust Benjamin. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody's judgment completely, but I trust his integrity. Yeah. No,
I would absolutely agree with that. I'm not sure I wouldn't have thought to use the word journalist to describe him. And if he does, then I should rethink that because I trust him to choose his titles carefully. But certainly the work that he has done that I'm most familiar with, which is on Evergreen, has been extraordinary and detailed and both accurate and precise.
Yeah. With respect to the first part of the question, the problem with the Antifa issue is unless you've tangled with them directly, you don't necessarily know what it is. So, and also the fact that they've labeled themselves in the style of the Patriot Act. It's hard to attack the Patriot Act because you don't seem like a patriot. It's hard to attack Antifa because it sounds like you might be favoring fascism. Now, of course, neither of those things are true, but
there are many examples of this. We should devote more time at some point to talking about these things that come with these labels, like pro-life and sex positive as well.
Yeah. What I would say is I think it is well worth having people consider the game theory. In other words, and I tweeted about this today, and I thought I got it, which was if you have all of these people, you're looking down on this protest and they're trying to figure out how to negotiate with each other. And, anybody in the group can sabotage it. Anybody who prefers violence can sabotage it by setting off a firecracker or throwing something at any moment. You can't get anywhere. And so once you've talked to the anarchists and you know that they don't want peace because they don't believe you could fix the system, and then you understand that they are interspersed in these crowds, that they are spray paint. Even if the crowd doesn't believe that all cops are bastards, the fact that all the walls seem to reflect the fact that the crowds think all cops are bastards, that can't be positive. So anyway, if you have a journalist that you know, sit them down and have them think this through. The disproportionate influence of the anarchists is going to make peace impossible. And what happens when peace is impossible? Well, we saw over the 15-minute break after our initial part of this live stream that we have a massive military force being deployed, and they've been issued bayonets. So that's where we are, bayonets. Let's not let the Antifa push us into battle.
Into trench warfare.
Well, into bayonets, let's say. One does not want to be pushed into bayonets.
I'm not sure what this next question means. I'm not sure it's complete. Isn't this part of Trump's Second Amendment? Trump's Second Amendment being in quotes, especially where government surrenders to rioters and looters. So maybe isn't this this thing that we're living? Maybe that's what the question is asking. Can you make sense of the intention here?
You know, I watched the speech and was left very puzzled by numerous parts of it, including that line. And I think it was very clearly, I'm not even sure it was a coherent thought. I think the idea was it was a wink at that fraction of the electorate that sees the Second Amendment as the core of the Constitution. And
so let me just say the next question is also about the Second Amendment. So maybe we can talk about this a little bit. Addressed to me, Heather, the Second Amendment is as profound a right as the first. Some mayors and governors would have it otherwise, a shot across their bow. So absolutely the second is as profound as the first. You know, the whole Bill of Rights are all quite profound, with the possible exception of the third, which just seems less relevant now. So yeah, I agree with you. I just don't know why it bore particular mention there. But the second part of this second question that we're addressing now with regard to the Second Amendment may be part of it, that this was a wink, perhaps not so much to would-be enthusiasts of a civil war, but a poke rather than a wink at the mayors and governors who are publicly and famously opposed to the way that the Second Amendment is being realized in America today.
Couple things. One, I don't think the Second Amendment is as profound as the first, and I don't think it can be, because the first can be quite unambiguous, and the fact is you don't have a right to a nuclear weapon. Therefore, your right to bear arms is inherently limited, and where we draw those lines is inherently less interesting than whether we let you say whatever it is that you feel you should say.
Well, and the first also, and I won't remember all of them, but it has this remarkable, it's just this beautifully constructed sentence or a few sentences, I can't remember, but beautifully constructed thing, which basically goes from the most personal to the most public with regard to the freedom of thoughts that you may have or does it go in the opposite direction? I can't remember now, but it covers all range of, from what you believe to what you say to what you proclaim and where you can say it and how you can exchange the ideas. And so, it really does cover all of these bases. So it's, it is a larger scope of amendment than the second.
Yeah. Now, the second is potentially very important, and I should say this is one of the places that I run afoul of our liberal friends, is that I don't think it's a slam dunk that the Second Amendment is just an anachronism. I think it is about tyranny, and there's a question about how relevant the arms that citizens can have are to full-scale governmental tyranny.
Are there people arguing that everything about the Second Amendment is an anachronism? Like I actually don't know that to be a position that's live now.
Well, it's not the craziest position in the world. I mean, the fact is, muzzle-loading muskets are, just not a good model. So the people who wrote the amendment didn't really understand what the amendment would end up covering.
Yep.
But on the other hand, it is phrased in a way that it makes it a curious statement, right? The invoking of the concept of a militia being the justification for the right to bear arms not being infringed is a head scratcher at some level. So anyway, there's a lot of ink spilled on this, of course, but the basic point is I think it has to do with tyranny, and I think it's still relevant. And that means that at some level we are paying a huge price annually for this hedge against tyranny, which presumably hasn't reared its ugly head in recent memory because, the firearms that would be relevant to it haven't been utilized. So anyway, it's a hedge against something that might happen. On the other hand, at the moment that we have soldiers being, deployed with bayonets to go keep peace amongst Americans on American soil, I don't know what to think. And, the problem is, to the extent that your personal weapons might be used to fend off tyranny, look at what you're up against. You're up against the American military, So, and hopefully that's not where we are. And, the thing I tweeted just before we went online here was that in light of the bayonets, this was a good moment for patriotic Americans to remind each other that following immoral orders is immoral. And I really think that's the central concept. And I must say, what I expect to happen if the order for tyranny comes down from the top, I expect the military to reject it, right? That's what you should do. That's what you must do. And I expect you to do it. If that doesn't happen, what happens with, I think I'm probably happy that the population is well enough armed that it simply will not roll over in the face of tyranny. And I think there are a great many very decent Americans who have weapons and will protect people who don't have them if it comes to it. So I find it odd that we are now talking about that in real time as if it might be just around the corner. But, in light of bayonets, how much farther down the road are we with bayonets today than we were yesterday at the threat of martial law?
Yeah. We saw some evidence of this 3 years ago when Evergreen was blowing up. And there was a moment before we actually fled the state and our home with our children because the threat of violence was so real. And a few among our friends, only one of whom I knew in advance had a concealed carry permit, revealed themselves to have arms and to be prepared to stand at the top of our driveway and defend us. And we thanked them and for their courage and for their friendship, and said we didn't need that. But it was a surprise, and I felt safer for it. Actually,
yep. Now I always feel the need to add when you mention this that we left the state because we had children and because members of our family told us that effectively. They didn't see us as having a choice. I would not have left. And there's a part of me that regrets leaving, but yes, it was the right choice to do it.
All right. There is much more to be said about the Second Amendment, but maybe we'll leave that for now. Let's see. So are we on the other side of the pandemic or just getting into the second wave that will come crashing down harder than before?
I see no evidence that we're on the other side of the pandemic.
Yeah, we're just not talking about it very much.
We're not talking about it. There's some bad information floating around from Italy about...
what's that? I don't know this.
A report came out. I'm not convinced something wasn't lost in translation that suggested that the virus was losing potency when, in fact, the whole thing was confounded by the fact that we're getting better at figuring out how to fight it. We're doing better at not spreading it. And so these things looks like it's becoming less dangerous, but that doesn't have anything to say about whether the virus is becoming less dangerous. And what's more...
I mean, potency is also, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think not a term of medical art. Like virulence is a term of art, but what does potency mean?
Lethality was the implication, but the question is, why is it less lethal? And even, let's say, the virus that is being seen in Italy, there's some argument to be made that it is less lethal. That doesn't have anything to say about the viruses that departed from the tree and left that branch.
The phylogenetic tree.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, at some level, the virus isn't the virus. The virus is innumerable lineages separate from each other, and the fact that one of them may be showing some sign of something is certainly interesting if it is, and I'm not convinced that this Italian report tells us that it was, but even if it did, it doesn't say anything about some virus that's disconnected from it in some other part of the world. So yes, I think we are about to see another wave by virtue of the fact that we're opening back up. And as we've said many times, there's an argument to be made for opening back up. There really isn't an argument to be made for not doing so in an extremely careful and enlightened way. You can probably afford to open the outdoor spaces back up. You should probably wear masks when you go there, but enjoy them. Make your vitamin D while you can, because winter will be back, I promise. Like that. But opening back up means enclosed spaces where the thing is transmitted, and a very heightened level of enlightened caution is the key way to allow opening back up not to produce a major new wave, though it is effectively sure to cause some bump.
Yeah. If history serves, if this virus is like other viruses, there will at least be a second and perhaps a third wave, maybe within a couple weeks, and maybe in the fall, in the northern fall, and maybe again in next spring.
Sure. Again, the vitamin D link is so important here. I've now begun to see the wider conversation take up the point that we've been making about outdoors being safe. So Pamela Paresky had an article in the New York Times a couple days ago that discussed the relative safety of outdoors. And then there was another article. Who was it? I just saw it today. But anyway, a couple major publications have now begun discussing the fact that outdoors, for whatever reason, appears to be almost safe, and that has implications on what we ought to do. One of them being in light of the fact that vitamin D seems to be both preventive in terms of getting you not to catch the disease, and it's valuable in terms of not getting very sick from it. Making your vitamin D now while the sun is shining here in the Northern Hemisphere makes so much sense. So if you do that now, then when it comes back, there'll be less illness.
Yep. Next question. Heather, Bret, agreed with you on white nationalists. The notion that is constantly spoken, yet is utter nonsense most times, is that white nationalists or supremacists or whatever show up in public events. Thank you. Yeah, I think if my cartoon idea of what white nationalists look like is right, and I don't know if it is, they, like Antifa, tend to show up and want to be identified as such. White nationalists don't want to be cryptic. Now, maybe I'm wrong. If they were trying to incite violence in the streets without it being clear that it was them, such that there was a reason then, since it was explicable why they then showed up, then perhaps we wouldn't be seeing evidence of them now. But in general, they show up and they're proud of it, and they're proud of who they are. And Antifa the same way. You can't tell who's who with Antifa because they're masked even when it's not pandemic times. But
let me say this. You've got your dyed-in-the-wool white nationalists who are committed that this is the right answer, and there will be no reasoning with them. And then you've got a lot of people who are flirting with the idea because superficially it sounds like the solution to some problem. We do have a race problem. Hey, this would be one way to solve it, right? Well, I don't think so. And I would like those of you who are flirting with this idea to think very, very carefully of what it is that you are actually proposing and what it would mean. And also to consider the possibility that we are not that far from a society that works, that is multiracial, and that were we to reach it, you would be so much the better for it. The burden of suspecting other people on the basis of their lineage is so great that really, guys, consider just giving it up, right? Why don't you throw your lot in with the rest of us? Let's fix this, and let's all benefit from having done so. It's by far the easiest route and the most honorable route. I see no other path.
Say that to get utility from their religious circuitry, you want a religion to install on the heads of a population you're taking to a habitable island. Can you each give 2 pillars you would want in such a religion?
Yeah, I mean, this is unfortunately the hard part of this is narrowing it to 2 pillars. And, it's obviously a question of accepting the premise of using religion.
I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time with the premise of putting something that is to be taken on faith into people's heads. And I'm not saying that it's not an interesting question, but I think I have literally not spent any time on this premise. So I would like to perhaps come back to this another time. But you go.
I will say, I'd like to just fix the premise and say, if we replace religion with something that is doing the job of religion in your hypothetical scenario here, then the question is what pillars would be important to include. And there are many. In fact, we have a Hanukkah tradition where each night we go through one of what we think are foundational principles that are worthy of revisiting annually. So anyway, we could pick any of those, but 2 of them would be don't game honorable systems. That would be one. And that if you're proposing something new that might have a downside, it has to be sustainable and reversible. That is to say, if it turns out it was some kind of a big error, you have to be able to undo it before you are allowed to do it in the first place.
Very good. Yeah. And I guess just to pick 2 others from that list that will be known to the listeners, the golden rule is, of course, on there. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the precautionary principle, which is related to one of the ones that you just said.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. How many potential COVID-19 deaths will result from these protests and riots? So I think you addressed that-ish at the end of the first
I would say
live stream.
Among the many, many reasons not to engage in looting, the looting is taking place indoors, and it is much safer to be outdoors. So
just add it to your list of reasons. If you were on the fence about looting.
You have about 1,000 independently sufficient reasons. This is on the list somewhere.
Yeah, good. Do you have any plans to divide your live streams into a series of smaller videos edited by topic like JRE clips? Yes, we should. It is a large task, and we have not figured out yet how to get it done. But yes.
Were we able to push a button and have it happen? This is something we would have done a long time ago. It's definitely on the list.
From a Darwinian perspective, what is the value of conscience?
Conscience. Like
Morals?
Feeling a moral responsibility.
Yeah. So I'm going to just quickly say, Bret actually wrote a paper on the evolution of morality, along with our friend David Lottie. You and he are co-authors on the paper.
Yep.
And it's terrific. And if I think of it, I will put that in the link.
Yeah. The basic answer,
or in the description of this video.
The basic answer is that there's going to be something on a temporal scale or a spatial scale that is valuable, which is not recovered by narrow self-interest. And so conscience is basically a corrective lens that causes an increase in well-being over time or space. So anyway, you can imagine, you can try all sorts of examples where there's something that if you did it, would result in an immediate benefit to you, but it would make you feel guilty, so you don't do it. And then if you think about what the guilt is a proxy for, it actually maintains a kind of good that will be destroyed if you were to engage in that action.
Good. Echo asks, can you both give your evolutionary perspective on beauty? Is the beauty we perceive in landscapes and objects related to how well they match our historical niches, e.g. good habitat, food preferences, tool efficiency? That's a beautiful question.
Yep.
In fact, and I think one of the ways that you can assess whether or not something has evolutionary efficacy is how universal it is across cultures. And there is a sense of aesthetic there is, a philosophy of aesthetics and a sense of aesthetic in all of the major religions. And I believe in pretty much every culture where it's been looked at, although anthropologists haven't been focused on that as much. So it's hard to know what its absence might mean in places where it hasn't been noted. Yes, in part, what we find beautiful has been linked with those places, like you say here, good habitat, food preferences. I'm less sure about tool efficiency, but probably actually with regard to, for instance, this beautiful knife that you have behind you here, that our friend Dave made for you. Why do we find the cut of a particular blade beautiful as opposed to another? And without being myself, say, just a knife maker or someone who has used knives for anything but pretty banal tasks, I still know a beautiful blade when I see it, and my suspicion is that is pretty well mapped onto those blades that will be efficient and effective for the jobs that they are best designed for.
Yeah, I would say it's a proxy for goodness. It doesn't mean it's a perfect proxy, but it's a proxy for goodness, and there's a positive feedback in it, because to the extent, let's say you have some natural preference for some kind of beauty that is correlated to some kind of goodness. Let's say it is in a tool or something like that. Your mind has some sense of symmetry and balance or something that causes one blade to look good. Well, then that beautiful blade that then you use and it's very effective reinforces the part of the proxy that's accurate. And so you can actually imagine that the proxy would get refined through use, and you would become more sensitive to what was actually a beautiful blade and what was kind of a bit of a counterfeit or something like that. So anyway, it would be a refinable proxy for goodness over time.
Yeah, no, and the fact, just to pick up on blades, the fact that a knife with a broken tip or with chips out of it, notches in the blade, everyone finds that less beautiful, and it is less effective.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. For Zach and Little Bro, hate to break it to you guys, but you have cool parents. I strongly suggest you continue to be receptive to their input and openly keep it real with them when you disagree. You hear that, man?
Yeah, I'll hear something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're awesome.
It wasn't cheap for me to put that comment into the list, so listen up.
No, we've got 2 teenage boys, and they're both completely fabulous.
They're keepers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can't have them.
Nope.
No. Let's see. Why is it automatically assumed that if a white policeman abuses or harms a black suspect, that is an instance of racism? Isn't that 1, tribal, and 2, a surrender to a false definition of racism? Yeah, and I presume that this came in before we actually talked about this in the first live stream. It is an error. It's a fallacy, and it is certainly more likely that than if the races were reversed, that people would think it was racism or that it was, because of what history has looked like. But it isn't inherently racism at all. That what did I say in my initial 14 points? Some cops are racist thugs. Well, simply by statistical inference, more cops than that are simply thugs. That you add racist to the mix, and it's a smaller group, and therefore less likely. So there are more bad cops out there who are just thuggish than are also racist and thuggish, and of course, the vast majority of them are neither.
It's funny how often Rodney King's famous line comes to mind. Can't we all just get along? I must say, I found that line haunting and endearing when he first said it, and it has stuck with me. And at some level, I get that we have a race problem that's interfacing badly with police, but for God's sake, can we just get over this? Seriously, it's not helping us. It's not.
Yeah. What do you think about Mike Pence? Is he the religious lunatic people say he is? Boy, you got something? I haven't thought a lot about Mike Pence, honestly. Like, I'll just answer off the cuff. I haven't given him a lot of thought. He was easy to mock for him being, almost Bible thumping-y. I don't want him to be president, but I'm not sure that he's a complete lunatic like people say he is. I don't have a beat on him, really.
Well, I don't want him to be president for policy reasons.
Yeah.
It's possible that, I don't know. Let's put it this way. I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't here, because in some sense, I don't know anything about him that, yes, I find him curious, and some of the things he apparently believes seem strange to me, but,
and archaic, right? I mean, he's just like a pre-modern dude at some level who's in one of the highest offices in the land.
yeah, and there's something paradoxical about that. You know, I'm not thrown by Amish people, and they're pre-modern.
Well, but they're not vice president.
Right. That's the thing. It's so I guess my point then is, if it's the context that makes Mike Pence a troubling phenomenon, I'm not sure I necessarily want to hold him responsible for that.
I guess I'd also say that, you know, we've known, I don't know if I've known any Amish people, but we know some Mennonites.
Yep.
And I would actually be pleased to have some, you know, at least one Mennonite in particular I'm thinking of, and you know who I'm thinking of, be in a position of power.
Sure.
And it is because we know him so very well, and it is a position that is so carefully thought out and not based on received wisdom. And at least the cartoon thing in my head about Mike Pence is that he's just sort of received, I'm a Christian and I take what's written in this book as literally the word of God. And that is a received wisdom sort of authoritarian take that I don't trust in a leader. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for also sharing the data about the reality of these police killings of Black folks. Greater chance of being struck by lightning, literally. Love you both. I don't know exactly what the greater chance of being struck by lightning refers to. That is, a Black person is more likely to be struck by lightning than to be killed by a cop. That is what I think that means. I don't know if it's true. It seems like it could well be. I don't think there's a question there, though, right? Thanks for the honest commentary from Texas. You're welcome. Consider that rioting makes everyone feel the pain of the oppressed and ignored. Have you considered that looting reflects racial, financial inequality?
Yeah.
Yep.
When Evergreen was melting down, we repeatedly made the point that the problem with the movement was that instead of ending racism, it appeared to be interested in turning the tables. So there is, I think, a deep-seated primordial instinct to turn the tables and to simply destroy. But what I would say is, look, the great leaders who have gotten us past major injustices have understood that they need discipline, that they need to be, they need to resist base impulses in order to reveal the hypocrisy of the system they're challenging. And this protest is so thoroughly failing to do that I think for all of us who, frankly, I am frustrated. I do think we are falling down on our obligation. I don't think we're falling down on our obligation for the same reason that many of the protesters feel that we are. I think there's a diminishing returns problem where the things that continue to cause racial injustice have become subtle. And because they are subtle, there's a frustration about not being able to name them. And so there's a temptation to point to things that aren't exactly right and all of that. But if you're going to force change, then you need to think about perceptions. And, Gandhi understood this, Martin Luther King understood this. And, the lack of anybody to speak for the movement and the lack of discipline of the protesters is so thoroughly counterproductive that there's almost nothing else that needs to be said, right? We can talk about what it actually is, but the point is you're losing people who were listening. That's not a good idea.
Yeah. If I feel that white people are now under threat of racial violence, does that make me a white nationalist?
No.
No, of course not.
Of course not.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine why it would. I think the problem with white nationalism is that it seeks a white state. That's the whole idea. And which
is laughable.
It's
It's
not
insane.
who we are. It's unpatriotic. It's undecent. And no, the recognition that white people are being singled out now is just a fact, and it doesn't make it universal, and it doesn't mean that it is the equivalent of what black people or Indians have suffered. But it is a fact. White people are being singled out, and none of us are quite sure what to do about it.
I just realized we're at 35 minutes.
35 minutes. Okay, let's get 2 more in here, and then we'll switch the questions in the next live stream. Hi, thank you. I'm seeing a lot of "there was only one race, there is no racism gene, it is learned" posts. From an evolutionary perspective, why do some believe this and virtue signal about it on Facebook and Instagram when it is false?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, my grandfather used to frequently argue that education was the solution to all of our problems. And he and I used to fight about this because he wasn't right. There are lots of things that you could understand and it doesn't fix them. But there is a sense in which understanding them gives you a great advantage in figuring out how to address them. I mean, game theory is something I invoke all the time for this reason. Once you see the very simple dynamics that cause something that should work not to work, you can begin to say, well, what would have to be different in order to make the thing function? So I think the problem is lots of people have been failed by an educational system that's so preposterous and so thoroughly fails to put in front of you the things you need to know that they are just left adrift figuring out how to think about problems. And it would be very nice if racism had no evolutionary basis. I would love that to be the case.
Oh, it would make things so much simpler.
The question really, though, is how could it possibly be true? How could it possibly be true? The fact is, a lineage of people that is capable of ganging up on other lineages of people has an advantage that a lineage that can't figure out who it's related to doesn't. So it can't possibly be true. What is true is that racial allegiance is not the only basis on which we can move forward. And those of us who have figured out how to put it aside have actually discovered that there's a tremendous amount of value to be unlocked in doing so. So we don't need it to be true that there is no evolutionary basis for racism in order for us to get past it. Many of us have.
And pretending that it's not true is going to make it harder to move forward.
It makes it impossible because it means that your system is stacked on a foundation that's partially mythological.
That's right.
So anyway, I don't know. I think people are basically confused about the nature of what they want to be true and what relationship it has to what is true. And, there are many marvelous quotes from the history of science from some of our best minds. There's one in particular from Medawar, in which he says something to the effect of, it's amazing how little effect what you want to be true has on what is true.
Yeah. And it's the reason that the concept of the naturalistic fallacy has been formalized the way it has, which is to say, the idea that what is true is what ought to be true is false. It's a false equivalence. And many people imagine it's some sort of a mystical thing that once you understand what is and you speak it, then it will become the thing that ought to be true for all time. And it's the thing that you want to be true. And no, one of the things that we speak to all the time is we understand, if we can understand the evolutionary underpinnings of what we are and why we do the things that we do, we will be much better equipped to actually move away from those evolutionary underpinnings. The only thing our genes want of us is to make more of themselves in the future. That's not interesting. We can do better. We can do a lot better.
We can do a lot better. The other problem, though, is there's the sense, and, I don't think scientists are doing us any favors. The fact that the virology community has this fiction it likes, which is the laboratory hypothesis couldn't possibly be right. That thing is effectively it trying to take a fiction and impose it as if it were a fact. Right? Mm-hmm. We see this all the time coming out of the critical theory crowd. where they take something that they would like to be a fact, and then they just assert that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the point is they go around brutalizing people who say that it isn't.
I
So
laugh, but no, it's awful. Yeah,
it's awful. So those of us who swear that men and women are two different phenomena, it's like, we're transphobes somehow.
Yep.
Really?
Right.
That's what we are? Oh, fascinating. Oh, and if you think that there's some relationship potentially between the level 4 virology lab in Wuhan and the fact that a coronavirus that is very similar to ones that they study happens to have emerged in Wuhan, you know what you are? You're a conspiracy theorist.
Mm-hmm.
This is authoritarian garbage, right? It's not right. Anybody who needs to threaten you in order to bully you into a fact probably is not peddling a fact. So anyway.
Transphobic conspiracy theorist.
Transphobic conspiracy. Imagine. Boy, my parents would be so disappointed.
One more from this, then we'll switch over. This is just a comment. Thank you, guys. Objective, factual podcasts like this are the antidote to the big media that has caused our nation to become so polarized. Much love. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Let me see if I can find. Have you marked? Got it. All right. So we're moving into, for the next 20 minutes or so, the next questions that came in this hour. In the last podcast, Bret proposed a change in presidential leadership as a solution to our current madness. I'd love to hear more details, but I'd love to hear Heather's thoughts on the idea.
Okay, as far as more details, you deserve more details. For those of you who were not listening to the last live stream, let me say I proposed something, and then at the most remarkable moment during that proposal, everything went technologically nuts. And I am trying not to imagine that was something beyond a coincidence.
Yeah. It was remarkable. I was watching from the other room.
Yeah.
And it was truly some stunning timing. Anyway, but you should say what it is for people who don't know.
It was a proposal. Here's the thing. I'm going to do it right with the details that didn't make it into that after the technological collapse. When we got back online, I was a little bit thrown by what had happened. It was as remarkable as it was for people watching. You have no idea how dramatic it was to have everything go haywire at once here. So
are you going to do it right now, or are you going to do it? Okay.
I'm going to do it in an encapsulated thing, probably not live, and I will upload it, and then you can see it. So anyway, there's more to come, but the basic thing was there was a plan for bypassing the major parties and their decrepit clown candidates.
I particularly like the part where he keeps calling them decrepit clowns, because that really is so accurate. I think it's a great idea. I don't know how to get the attention of the people whose attention we need. And I think it's necessary. I feel a barrier that I have no idea how to get out of the way. But I do think it's utterly necessary. It felt necessary 4 years ago. It feels even more necessary now.
Yeah, I think history is doing us a favor, right? History is doing us no favors in the sense that bayonets are being issued to American soldiers to go keep the peace amongst American citizens. But when that kind of thing happens, I think people who have been telling themselves some story about what it is we're going to do to get out of this problem are going to start to realize that they have been set adrift in very dangerous circumstances with completely inadequate tooling, and they're going to have to start thinking outside the box and listening to people who've already started thinking outside the box, because otherwise we ain't going to make it.
It's a tragedy podcasts like this don't have more viewers. I hope people wake up and realize how much better this content is than mainstream media. Thank you.
I disagree. Okay, maybe I should rephrase that. I agree. Bring your friends and spread it around. Tell people. We would love to have more viewers, and we're very grateful for the viewership we have. It's quite a number of people, and it's rewarding. But it would be great. It does feel like it needs to jump into some realms that people are just unaware of it.
That's right. Would you both consider running for Congress in an organized effort with your fellow IDW friends to form an IDW party?
All right. You know very well I can't run in an organized effort.
I know this. I don't know that.
Organized is just not going to happen.
It's not your thing.
Yeah.
It's really not. We've talked about something like this.
Let's deal with the decrepit clown problem first, and then we'll talk about the other thing.
Okay.
Right.
We'll leave it there.
Okay.
Fair enough. I'm just reading these in order, so I'm going to read this next one. Do you find it suspicious that George Floyd, his father, the killer cop, and Trayvon Martin's father are all Freemasons? And what about George's chest tat? I don't, because I didn't know that, and I still don't know what to make of it.
I still don't know it.
Yeah.
I don't know that any of that's true.
Right. Nope.
I don't know what to make of it. I mean, if that actually is true, I'm sorry to be making light of it, but
just haven't had time to independently assess, and honestly may well not get to it because there are so many things drawing our attention. Like, what was it? Bayonets. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
I must not see experts and leaders the way you two do. I saw how she tried to explain it with the quote, but wasn't she describing freedom itself? What purpose does a leader serve to you? So I wonder which quote you're talking about. Is the quote from Trump or the quote from Dostoevsky?
I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I will say the thing about leadership is, it's not. We have a simulacrum of leadership, and it has confused us all because we have lost the sense for what it's actually like to have a leader. And so therefore we don't know what it makes us capable of. And I think probably people who have faced, if you've been in a foxhole, then you understand this intuitively. If you've been in a serious crisis, you understand it intuitively. If you've lived decades in America with the kind of nebulous ebb and flow politics that really isn't about you, it's kind of a thin cover for a kind of corruption that just, has become so everyday we don't even see it, then you don't get what you're missing. But you will if we can figure out how to bootstrap leadership back into existence.
Do you think people in America today are working in the right direction to solve the issue of police brutality and racial profiling? Right now? Today? No. 10 years ago, I would have said I thought so. I thought we were moving in the right direction. 5 years ago, not so sure. Something is shifting, and it's becoming harder to do the right thing, I think.
I mean, I just think the problem is with all of these things, there's a kind of reformer mentality. And the point is actually we're so far off the mark that anything that falls under the term reform isn't going to be sufficient.
So what do you mean by a reformer mentality?
That, there's all of this verbiage about here's the plan, what we're going to do to address it. And none of these plans are ever very good. And my point would be actually a lot of these things aren't a matter of tacking some new thing that corrects the problem onto the old thing. That's epicycles. It's more like, what assumption did we get wrong? Why does the system work like this, right? And those things more often are a matter of thinking very carefully and discovering the counterintuitive thing that you overlooked the first time, rather than just more architecture designed to address the goddamn thing for once and for all, right? So anyway, my point would be reformism to me is kind of uninteresting. The problem is the alternative to reformism is often understood to be something like revolution, and we absolutely cannot afford revolution. So what I've been saying is we need revolutionary change without revolution. We need something that is sort of enlightened and brings us the upgrade without the violence that accompanies it. And this is readily possible, but it doesn't come from a sort of piecemeal approach. This is one of the things that absolutely drove me crazy about the primaries, was this obsession over policy details. Right. Like these people were supposed to be encyclopedically aware of all of the nuances of policy and budget and all of this in order to spell out exactly what they're going to do as president, even though that's not what presidents do. And, it's a circus, right? That's not how it goes. What you really want is somebody in the office who gathers the right people and can have the frank conversation where you can actually navigate your way to what did we miss, right?
Yeah. So before you said all of that, I was thinking that there are sort of three categories of approach. And the one that you're calling the reformer approach is add more stuff to the extant architecture and see if that fixes the problem. And of course, what it guarantees is more bureaucracy, more bureaucrats, more middlemen and middle management, and therefore will, at the very least, cause bloat. And then at the opposite end, excuse me, you have revolution. And this is what the revolution is sometimes necessary, right? But the way that the anarchists, as you described in the last hour, would have us do it, just burn it all down, burn the whole thing down, and let's hope that we get a great looking phoenix out of the ashes. Not going to happen, right? Yep. And then there's this, it's not intermediate. It's not an intermediate thing, but there is an approach that involves looking at what we have, looking at this architecture, and instead of saying, let's put some more stuff up here, or just let's destroy the whole thing, let's look at this architecture and look at the decision trees and go, okay, well, that thing isn't working. Let's see if we can undo that back to there. Oh, it's still not working, back. And sometimes you're going to have to take out whole branches, right? Like whole branches of a tree, or, maybe this is a systemic thing. It's a forest. And sometimes you'll have to take out whole trees, but that doesn't mean burn the whole damn forest down. And it doesn't mean add stuff on top of the trees. It means let's selectively prune the things that we've got and create better systems within a foundation that, the foundation of, for instance, this country is solid. It's archaic in places. It couldn't possibly have predicted some of the things we're dealing with now.
Sure,
but our foundation is solid.
Yep. It strikes me that it's Buckminster Fuller's ephemeralization, right?
Yeah.
Learning to do more and more with less and less until eventually you can do everything with nothing. And of course, that's not to be taken literally, but that's the process. Is you want a more and more elegant system that is light-handed. That can do fantastic things. And, we see elements of this, right? We saw Elon Musk's SpaceX put astronauts back into orbit under American power once again, and it was fantastic, right? We see glimmers of this, and then we see the same people. We see Elon also playing with the solution to the traffic problem is a system of underground tubes. I mean, he's got both impulses, but but anyway, the point is people are thinking, and you got to give Elon credit for having the vision to imagine that civilization could look like something different rather than looking like an improved version of same.
Yeah. Heather, what is your favorite joke of Bret's? Bret, what is your favorite joke of Bret's? I feel like this question came across before we didn't get to it, and instead of thinking about it, I haven't. And I think I don't file things that way.
I don't think you like my jokes.
That's not true. That's really not true, and you know it.
I do.
But when I'm asked almost any, what's your favorite? I freeze and I can't remember even what's on the list. I can't do it. So it's not that I don't think you're funny, love.
I appreciate that. No, it's a little like, I don't think you have this thing, but the most mundane arithmetic becomes difficult at the chalkboard for me. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, but, I don't have that problem, but I see how it's the same thing.
Yeah. It's just not the right frame of mind, I guess. But okay, so I don't know what my favorite joke is, but I do have a joke I've been unable to tell until now. Okay. So it's not a joke that you tell, but it's one that I resent that history denied me the ability to deliver because I really thought it was high quality. There was a point when John McCain, a figure for whom I had a lot of respect, but I understand there are some people who have, regard him as a war criminal and all. I don't. But anyway, John McCain was dying of a brain tumor. And there was a question about Trump attending his memorial. And John McCain had said that he didn't want it. And I very much felt like tweeting at him, I wouldn't pick a fight with him at this point, but it's your funeral. But I couldn't. I mean, it would have been in such bad taste. And my feeling is it's still too soon, but
It
you
is.
asked the question, so this is on you.
Yeah. No, this is we can blame Elliot.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
I should say, I also, the day before your near fatal boat accident,
In
we
Galapagos
were
in March 2016.
we were at this crater that we had hiked up, looking at this sort of active
Active volcano in Isabella and Galapagos.
Isla Isabella, and there was one of these smoke pots, and I told the students that they should go down and it's new land that has emerged from the magma, and they should go down and claim it, and it would be their funeral, which I thought was a terrible joke. But what were they going to do? They were on the rim of this crater. They had nowhere to go.
And you've repeated it here.
Yes, apparently. Well, there you go.
There it is. You mentioned a racial outreach session as a way to lower the tensions, but then mentioned that it failed at Evergreen. Wouldn't it fail anywhere because the premise is a lie? Isn't this more about feral kids?
No. I'm just going to riff here for a second. The fact about addiction, right? This is not directly about addiction, but the fact about addiction is that we've learned that actually addiction, whatever it is, emerges in light of boredom and nothing productive to do. And that people who have productive things to do often will avail themselves of those opportunities. And I think something similar is going on here. There were some baddies, a couple in the protests who
At Evergreen.
turned the world upside down. And I have no doubt that we are seeing the same thing happen on the streets of major American cities now, where some people who actually are just itching for a fight because it's what they're good at are creating these conditions. But if you for God's sake, look at some of these videos of the moments when the protesters and the cops are trying to figure out how to talk to each other. They're not even, frankly, the same species, right? The weird thing that we learned, it occurred to me before the Evergreen crisis, that nobody in our circle knows any police officers. They kind of don't circulate amongst us, right? So it's not an easy thing to figure out how they're just not at the same barbecue, so you don't have a mechanism to learn how to talk to them. But the fact is, if you cross that bridge, which I've done many times intentionally, there is a way. And these protesters are discovering that there are human beings on the other side, and the police are discovering that these punk kids aren't necessarily all punk kids, and something wants to emerge from that. And it gets broken down for the stupidest reason, which is that any one person who wants to sabotage it has the ability to do so, right? You can't have that. But my point is, are there feral kids? Yeah, there are a few of them. But I don't think they would be dominating this in any way if we had a coherent framework. Can you imagine that list of people that we named if you brought them together? I mean, frankly, Jonathan McWhorter and Glenn Lowry together on the Glenn Show? Like, it's nonstop fascinating. These guys do not agree with each other. They don't come from the same perspective. They both regard each other as highly decent, and the conversation reveals things constantly. Now, imagine that you take the Glenn Show and you add all of those other people to that same stage, and then you just put good questions, difficult questions on the table. People who care about this would be fascinated by it, and they would be drawn in by the decency of the people in the discussion. I don't think there's any way it fails.
Well,
I don't think, and what failed at Evergreen was that Evergreen didn't have the decency or the imagination to let it take place. It's not like we tried it and it didn't work. It's like they said no. That's it.
I guess I read the question a little bit differently. A racial outreach session is not what you just described. Doesn't sound to me like a racial outreach session. I think what this person is asking is, get a bunch of the protesters together to engage their grievances, perhaps with policemen. Now, this is something that, for instance, I think that John Wood Jr. has been working on with Better Angels, and I think I forget now if he's now with a different organization. Apologies, John, if you're watching, or if there's another organization that's also doing similar work. I'm sure there are. That it can be effective, putting people who in advance say, absolutely, I identify as being someone who doesn't like those sorts of people, and allow them to simmer down and just calm down and be together listening to each other for a while. And people start to listen.
Yep. Yeah. And I saw Chloe Valdery, one of our favorites, proposing something I think is quite brilliant. She wants to hold basically I think it would be trivializing it to call it a dance party, but a dance gathering in which the music is carefully curated. And
she'd be such the person to do that.
Oh, she is such the person to do
so
it.
Good. Yeah.
Now, I would say she gave an abbreviation for the place she was thinking of doing this, and I couldn't tell whether it was indoors or outdoors. Chloe, it needs to be outdoors for viral reasons, but if you can do it outdoors, it's a great idea.
She's talking in New York, because that's where she is. Yeah.
Yep. And I think, it could be contagious in the best sense. Mm-hmm. But there's lots of energy and creativity. This, again, the irony is this is the deepest bench we have. We have brilliant, creative, fascinating, highly decent people, and we have a bunch of them on this topic. So what the hell are we doing?
Yeah. Next question. Thank you for doing this podcast. Would you two be willing to take psychedelic mushrooms with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris for the good of humanity? Yeah, I'd be willing to do that for the good of us.
You got me? No. Yeah, I mean, sure. I have a feeling Sam and I would end up in a difficult conversation.
Jordan and I could have fun talking to each other while you and Sam did whatever you were going to do.
Sam and I might become a problem for each other. But
yeah, I think you might.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, sure.
But you'd emerge friends.
Oh yeah. 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 I mean, all jokes aside, magic mushrooms are fun, but they're also an amazing tool for mind broadening. There's nothing mystical about that. They basically break normal thought patterns without so thoroughly disrupting thinking that you can't be productive at it. So anyway, yeah, it's an important tool, and whatever the context was for the good of humanity, sure.
Yeah. Are either of you aware of Gilbert Ling's association induction hypothesis? What is our chance to solving this pandemic if our fundamental bilayer pump cell theory has been experimentally disproven? I think that's two different questions, but I honestly don't know enough about either of them to be totally sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love a good, deeply heterodox hypothesis in biology, and a lot of them, I mean, most of them are wrong, but the frequency with which we see something fundamental about what we believe severely disrupted by what we then learn is pretty high. And so I don't know this one in particular, but
you're talking about the bilayer pump cell theory now, not the Gilbert Ling's association induction hypothesis, or do you think that it's the same thing?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
But I will say, as we've talked about before, we have a problem where there's certain things that you can diagram very well, and there's certain things that are impossible to diagram. And so our thinking
I could call up the image of the bilayer pump at the cell membrane, right? Everyone can who's spent any time with those textbooks.
Right. I mean, look, even just the definition of enzyme, right? Yeah. Right. Enzyme is a catalyst. Really? I mean, yeah, technically, sure, but really? No, it's a goddamn machine is what it is, right? And, it's like a factory. But the thing is, those of us who grew up with diagrams of an enzyme as a static entity that, took a triangle-like object and a square-like object and oriented them in such a way that they clunked together so the two sides fit. Those of us who had that thing have a kind of dim view of what an enzyme really is. And those of us who had the animation in which, the replication complex is taking units and like that thing, we have a much better sense of what it is. So, there's a lot of places where every biologist on Earth is synchronized into dim-witted thinking by some bad drawing that caught on. And the sooner we free ourselves from those things, the better off we'll be.
There's some really good animations, too, that you've pointed me to and that you then used when you were teaching intro bio. And I'm sure, just even absent everything else that you did, just handing the students those tools, the animation tools of the tools of molecular biology animated in the way that we currently imagine it to be operating is staggering.
I mean, just even the one, we should probably show it at some point, but the one of the motor protein marching the neurotransmitters down the axon of the neuron, right? Like, I mean, you have to look
it's
at
adorable.
that. It's amazing, right? It's wonderful. And, it fits so well with the mushroom question too, because once you've seen that that's what's going on in your cells, it's just a whole different universe.
Right.
We're at 1 hour 5 minutes.
Okay, let's answer one more question, and then apologies, as always, for not getting to all of your questions, so many of which are really, really high quality. Linda asks, when asked about meditation, you responded that you do not formally meditate yourself, but that you embark on doing things that produce some analogous effects. Could you and Heather elaborate on what some of these things are? May I start by saying that I was lucky enough to be invited as a senior in high school to participate in what was called a Buddhist artist retreat. Would have been 1987. That was led by Thich Nhat Hanh, who was then not very well known, but who has now become fairly well known as a Buddhist expat of Tibet. And I was there. It was in Ojai in California at the Ojai Foundation with a lot of beat poets and various other artists. And Thich Nhat Hanh led us in 3 sitting and 1 walking meditation every day. And other times we cooked and kept the place clean, and we wandered the natural lands, and we did whatever art was, which for me was writing, and also I was doing some 2D and beginning to do a little bit of ceramics. And I will say that while I did not keep up the tradition of meditating much beyond those 2.5 weeks or so that I was there with that amazing group of people, decades younger than anyone else who was in attendance, that many pieces of it are exactly what I go to, right? The being in nature, being alone, walking in solitude, writing, finding the truth and beauty in art and in creation. And then also in reference to the earlier questions, there is value in hallucinogens, in entheogens as well.
So I play Mario Kart. Actually, I don't even know what Mario Kart is, but I know that there's something called that. So I don't do that.
I take it all back. I don't find your jokes funny.
Fair enough. This is an interesting one. I think I do a lot of stuff that puts me in this frame of mind. It's not of one type. The thing I miss, our old house, the one we were forced to move from when we came to Portland, and in general, I'm very glad that we moved to Portland, but we had a second building in which we had put in basically a tinkering space and a pottery studio. And tinkering for me is it's not even meditative. It has that component, but it also just sort of trains the mind kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I miss it. And our place here, while it has that potential, we just haven't gotten there yet. And so I think I'm suffering a little bit from its absence, and I'm probably getting stupider, which I would like to stop doing soon.
There's also something that both of us seek and have sought and have inspired in our children is, I have shorthanded it to speed, that I love the experience of physical speed. And we find it on bikes. And you this year just barely began to introduce our children to it on skis. And then the lockdown happened, and I think you got out with them twice, and I hadn't yet gotten out with you. It's mostly bikes for us, but any sort of ability to go really fast under your own power is ecstatic in a way that produces some of the same effects, to use some of sort of Jamie Whale's languaging around seeking ecstasis rather than catharsis through, some people get it through meditation, solitude, quiet depths, and some people through, extreme sports. And, there's room to be had for experiencing this, for getting the kind of meditative effects in both ways, usually not simultaneously.
Yep. I would also add, this one I feel a little weird about, but love the bicycles. I'm a huge fan, and I like skiing quite a bit, and it was cool to get back to it. But there's this other thing that we have started to do, which has a terrible name and it needs a better one, but electric unicycle. An electric unicycle is not honest in the same way that a bicycle is. A bicycle, you put in every bit of energy to climb the hill, and then you get the reward going down. The electric unicycle is something you plug in. It's got a battery, one wheel in a little case, and 2 pedals that you stand on. But it's a little bit like, you don't put in the energy to go sailing, right? The energy comes from the wind, but you take advantage of the energy, and it's very natural. And in some ways, as synthetic as electric unicycle is, it's very quiet, it's very natural, and you can whiz through the night if you want. My kids and I broke curfew the other night and went out into Portland to see what curfew looked like because I have an authority problem, I guess. But
so let me say that. What's that, Zach?
No, we'll do it another time.
Yeah, I will say that you said this is. I think was this the second night of curfew?
I don't remember.
Yeah, second night actually. Yeah.
Okay, so you said, I think I have to go out there. I just can't. I've never been under curfew before. I can't do it. I got to go out there. And I, in a moment of just brilliant parenting, said, "Well, are you going to take the children with you?" Now, to be fair, I was under the explicit impression that you were not going to take them downtown.
Oh, so was I.
Which you then did.
Right.
At 8:30 at night.
All right. I think we've confessed too much. This is you know what this is? I'm not even sure if electric unicycles exist. What we're doing here is we're writing some fiction. We're jointly writing some fiction on the spot. And it's marvelous. I hope somebody invents this thing eventually because it sounds like it could be great.
I'd love
cool.
to try it.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
I think I'm recovered enough now from my injuries, not from an electric unicycle, but from a boat a number of years ago. Maybe that's where we should stop for today.
Yeah, perfect. Right. So I hope you've enjoyed our little experiment in live fiction generation.
Yeah. Actually, fiction generation, fiction, engaging with fiction, and for me, writing fiction is also an answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been awesome. Please like, subscribe. And yes, if you think there are not enough people watching this podcast, you're probably right. So point them our direction, and we will do our best to say provocative and shocking things at a somewhat regular interval. Okay. Be well. Stay safe.